inspiring biblical families. Turning Hearts Podcast with your hosts, Ryan Phillips and Dennis Aldy.
Well, hello, everyone. Welcome back to Turning Hearts Podcast. Ryan Phillips, Dennis Aldy. How you doing?
Doing great, Ryan. Good to be back.
Back again. Okay. Yeah. Let's jump right in, being that this one's, we'll try to keep it not short, but good and to the point.
Yeah.
I kind of want to focus a few, maybe two or three, definitely two episodes here dedicated to raising children and what that means at the young adult stages.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we've talked a little bit about rites of passage. Your book that you're putting together deals with this. It might not go by that title, but something similar, somewhere around there. But it's, for me, it was pretty much the first time that I ever heard anything around this area related to Christian living, anyway, surprisingly. But dealing with raising children, and specifically on this one, we'll keep it to the men and the boys and sons. Next one, we may dive off into the daughters. But the question being, can I expect my son to be a man at 13 years old? You know, can I expect him at 13 to handle the pressures of life? Can I equip him by 13, I should say? Can I equip my son at 13 years old to be a man and to have the maturity, we talked before about expectations.
Yeah.
Here's an expectation that I can aim for. And should I aim for it at 13?
Yeah.
And go.
Yeah. Well, I tell you, I love that question. I've lived through that question 7 times, and I am still living through it. I'll say 5 times with sons and twice with daughters. Let me start just a little bit before that and say, why do a rite of passage? And you know what? You do not have to do a rite of passage. And I don't call them rites of passage anymore. I do have a book that, it keeps getting closer. I believe we're going to call it Seasons of Passage, or a season of passage, because in my opinion, it's more than just this event that's called this rite of passage. And, it was in the biblical culture of the Jews. We still heard of it, but we as Americans don't know a lot about it. And I don't know if what I did is similar to theirs or not. There wasn't an intention to, but I have heard, what little I've read is that at 13, they have a bar mitzvah, and it's where the son comes of age. There's a party where everybody celebrates that. And I think it has to do with responsibility, things of that nature. I'm not a Jew or been around that, so I don't know. So I don't want to tell what I don't know or what little I know.
The only thing equivalent, I think, in America that we have to that would probably be a graduation party.
High school graduation is the closest thing that the American family calls a rite of passage, because we've watched this young child go through elementary, middle school, high school, and there's this clear marker. And if you go to a graduation, which I just watched one on Zoom, and my niece attended a couple here recently, and everything about it is you're going off as an adult now. Now you're an adult and go into the world and go ye therefore, And so it is our rite of passage, no doubt. So we actually believe in them, whether or not we know it or not.
Yeah.
So I'm just saying there is this instinctual something in us that a son or a daughter comes to this point, and parents kind of say, we think you're ready to go for something more. And I think that, and I think we've said this on a Zoom or a podcast before, Ryan, I think the transition physically in the body of a child through puberty to the body of an adult body, it's called puberty, is one of the most difficult transitions that humans go through. Now, there's multiple other transitions. And to me, the transition of maybe at a season where we could be leaving our home like a graduate, that's a difficult transition. And we need to know how to bring our young adults through that transition. When we get married, that's a transition from being single. And I talk about that one right now with my kids all the time because they're all right at the marrying age. So I'm like, you just trust me, when you get married, it's going to be different than living with mom and daddy. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So there's many. We have our first kid. There's a transition going on. So I just want to say that there's a need for guidance and help through transitions. And that,
I think.
Go ahead.
I definitely think there's a social expectation or a social standard already, because even at a social, you go back to biblical times. At 13, 14, 15, they're out of the house, maybe starting a family of their own.
Yeah.
And back then that was acceptable, and it lined up a little bit better with maybe that puberty stage. That was kind of God's way of saying, this is the time the adult transition should happen.
Yeah.
And they were a little closer to that. Now, even though we're talking about 13, and maybe, I don't know when they do their standard bar mitzvah, but maybe that's still 13. But our social dynamic has changed a little bit to where and even you with your kids, we're not going to go expect our 13, 14, 15-year-olds to get married and start a family.
No.
So that maybe that's even still 18, 19, 20, and so on. But, and you can't really change that. That's socially acceptable now. And I think that's where it's at.
Yeah.
But I think that we've kind of surrendered a little bit that the social or the culture should dictate when our kids are adults, when they're mature enough to be adults. Totally. And we've kind of surrendered that to whatever the world says that my child, or maybe it's because of public school, that we have kind of surrendered the world to judge when my child is mature enough that I should let go.
Yeah.
So just to clarify a little bit, those two, I feel like there's two different ones. There's the marriage transition.
Yeah.
And then there's the adult one.
Yeah.
That we need to reclaim.
Yes, totally. And reclaim's a perfect word, because we haven't known what to do. And so we've done nothing and hoped, and it hasn't worked. And when I say hasn't worked, 80% of the time it hasn't worked. So let's reclaim that and see if we can get that it works 80% and not 20%. You know what I mean? And I believe Christ purchased that for us again. So that's kind of why we went after it. Here's what I think, and you said some real key words. I kind of was writing them down over here because I wanted to address them. First is, can a 13-year-old be an adult or whatever? Well, let me just say this. So when their body changes from not being able to bear children or produce children to being able, that is the transition of puberty. Those things are now kicking in. The hormones and the physical changings are taking place so that can happen. That to me is the sign in the physical of adulthood. Now it's very young, it's very immature, but it is adulthood. And the thing I want to say, I want to use your language, there's nothing about that indicates maturity or not. And I think that's how we kind of get sidetracked. And I've had discussions with parents that say, well, my kid's not mature enough to be adult because they act like this. No, wait a minute. they may be an adult and their behavior may be immature, but their physical body is an adult because they could produce children.
We've seen a pretty good example so far of adults acting like
That's
immature.
what I'm saying. We got
children.
30-year-olds. If the issue is maturity, I don't know if I'm an adult yet. I mean, if the issue is maturity, then we got 80-year-olds, probably not an adult. So we know that's not the case. And that's what we're trying to deal with. And I relate it to the issue of when is adulthood, and I believe it's when our body becomes an adult body. And by that, I define that as a body that can reproduce, offspring, male or female, both of those, being able to. And the second thing would be, I relate it to Jesus being baptized by John the Baptist. Okay. And let me explain that. So Jesus was 30 years old. He feels that it's time to do the work of why I was sent to the earth. He goes out to John the Baptist, and John the Baptist sees and he's like, "Oh, your sandals, I'm not worthy to even touch your sandals, much less baptize you. You're the anointed one." And he hasn't been anointed. And Jesus says, "No, come on, we got to do this." And so John baptizes Jesus. He comes out of the water. The Holy Spirit, like a dove, comes on Jesus, and the Father makes this statement: "This is my Son, in whom I'm well pleased." And Jesus at this point has not done, now this could be debatable to some, but not done anything for the Father in heaven. Now, he said no to sin and, all these things, but as far as ministry activity, which is what you would think, what we're tempted to think makes the Father pleased, Jesus hasn't done any of it. And he's already called the best son on the earth by the Father in heaven who doesn't lie. So before the maturity of ministry is there, he's already been given the identity of it. And that's what I believe the Father did to Jesus before he went out into ministry. Mm-hmm. And it's actually what I believe gave Jesus the ability to minister out of confidence and not out of manipulation to get that I'm pleasing to people, because his Father had already given it to him before he ever did one act of healing, deliverance, preaching, any of it. And that's what I believe this passage from young adolescence to young adulthood is. I'm saying, you know what? You are very immature, but you're an adult. And I declare it, and I'll fight anybody that says you're not. And that labels and gives identity to our young adult that they can now actually go and do some adulting. They're immature. They're so immature. So the issue of adulthood in the scriptures is not tied to maturity. I mean, if it was, again, none of us could be one, because we're all immature in areas. Again, I am immature in areas, but yet people consider me an adult. And certainly the fact that I take a college class and fail it doesn't mean I'm mature enough to be an adult. Mm-hmm. I mean, so when am I an adult? I believe I'm an adult when my body goes through the process of becoming one. And then I get the Lord, like the Father in heaven says to Jesus, "I'm pleased with you." You go to your son and you say, "Son, you hadn't done a thing right yet." And I know you don't say that, but you hadn't gone out and proven the Aldy name in the world yet. and I'm pleased with you. And miraculously, that imparts us an identity and a strength to the inside of our young, whatever, 12 to 14, 15-year-old son, 13. And it's like he has this peace on him to go be it. Whereas before, he's trying to figure out, did this make me an adult? Did the fact that I pulled over the car today, they won't do that at 13. Well, at 16, I pulled over the car, I was driving down the road, and there was someone on the side of the road with a flat tire. And the fact that I pulled over and changed the tire for, now am I an adult? Was that mature? And so we can't relate it to maturity. We relate it to a season. And when the season happens, and again, this is where the enemy has robbed us from our children, robbed our children from us. Mm-hmm. Because we didn't step in and give that identity to them. The enemy keeps saying, well, if you have sex, maybe you'll be an adult. If a girl likes you, you'll be an adult. If you look at porn, the enemy's there saying, well, this will make you an adult if you do this. Well, if you drink beer with your buddies and get drunk and can't drive home, that'll make you an adult. Mm-hmm. And it's because of the absence of the voice of the parent, the father, declaring adulthood, that they don't know. So they got to test these things out to see if I'm an adult. I mean, I taught a man class, and I'm not bragging on my man class, but I said there were 60-year-old man in there that confessed, I've spent the last 60 years trying to get somebody to tell me if I'm a man or not. And it's
a question that every man has.
Am
I enough? Can I do this?
Yeah.
Do I have what it takes?
What makes me a man? That's the question. And we didn't know the answer is a penis. Okay. We thought the devil comes and says, well, it's if you'll use that penis in this way, then you're a man. Or if you'll use women in this way, then you're a man. And so we're getting rid of all that and we're bringing it back to a biblical, I'm a man and here's why. And I'm an immature man I'm an immature adult, but I'm still an adult. So this is what that practically means. Mm-hmm. So when my kids went through that and we had the ceremony, now again, I have a lot of people, and I don't think we've done it. If we've done it well, then let's don't bring it up sometime, Ryan. But someday, I think there's a question of what does that really look like on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. So we'll get there someday. That's not this one, though. Yeah. If we haven't, and I just don't remember well. But
yeah,
my sons, when they went through this year of dating and study and what we went through, and then we had the ceremony, and I knighted them as an adult, as a man. I did. I pulled out a dagger.
Dated their father this year.
Yeah. They dated. Yeah, they didn't date some girl. No, Lord Jesus. No, I personally went out on dates with my sons, and then we felt it was time. And I believed that the Lord was saying, Dennis, in front of these people, kind of like Jesus, John the Baptist, there's people there. And in front of them, the Father steps out of heaven and says, this is my son, and I'm pleased with him. So that's what I publicly wanted to do for my son. We invited people over. I did that. The very next day, he still acted like a 13-year-old, but he was different. I can tell you there was a peace on his life that he's not now thinking, well, if I please mama today, please. And again, there are good things we can do to please, but there's also the enemy out there trying to get us to do bad ones to prove we're a man. Mm-hmm. And we're just eliminating that through this process. Maturity is a totally different subject. I do expect my sons to be different that next day, but I don't over expect there to be some maturity that's not 13 years old. No,
it's an establishment of their identity.
That's what it is.
They're not seeking for acceptance anymore.
Yes. And that gets them.
They're immature and their things they say, the things they do, the mistakes they make, but they're not reaching for acceptance anymore.
Exactly. That's a great way of saying it. And And you know what? I take the next. So I have a 30-year-old son. So if that happened at 13, so for 17 years, he and I still been maturing as a man together. My 26-year-old son or 7, which you only ever want to, I think he's 27. If it happened at 13 for him, 14 years, I'm still in that conversation and he's still learning things to help him move. Now he just got married, so there's another transition going on. And so we're still moving through that transition, but all of those are maturings. And so, no, this isn't an issue of maturity. I've shared this story, but I'm going to share it again in this pod. My wife, so my oldest son had been through his ceremony. My second son had been through his, and the third one had just. One guy's about 4 years out. He's 17, another 15, and another 13. And that's roughly the age. And I send them with their mom to go help her do a job, pick up something. And they get there on that project, and it was just pick up some carpet out of a house and put it in the back of the truck so mom could bring it to our house. And they didn't know what they were going to do. Daddy just said, y'all go help mama. And they get there, and when she says, well, we got to pick up all this carpet, they all like, man, if I'd have known this, I wouldn't have come. Well, boy, that wasn't the right thing to say to mom. How dishonoring, how unmature manly, So mom came home. Man, she was so upset. She's like, that manhood thing you do, that's the biggest joke on the earth. Those guys, they're the most immature. They're not men. They're worse than children. I mean, she just let me have it. And I didn't take it offensive at all. I just said, baby, I'm sorry. Let me hold you. I'm sorry they treated you that way. And I did. I went to them.
Gone crazy.
Yeah. I went to them and I instructed them in how a man at 17 acts, though. I don't expect a 17-year-old to be a 40-year-old. I don't. But he is an adult. He's just been an adult about 4 years. So I expect him to have about a 4-year ability in that, not a 40-year ability. Dennis Aldy had been an adult probably for 40-something years or 40 years. So I got a little more experience at it and maturity at it than a 25-year-old adult or 15-year-old adult. So I have reasonable expectations, but that labeling, that identity, that foundation is there. And believe it or not, that foundation being there is what helps them to become it, not searching to find out if they can become it. Because we were created, every young man, I'm telling you, he was born to be a man. There's something in him that wants to know, do I have what it takes to be a man? So, Dad, you go tell him he's got it, even when he doesn't display it. You tell him he's got it. And then when he doesn't display it after you've told him that, come alongside and say, that is not the way to do it. Now, you're still a man, but that's not how a man behaves. And we can deal with behavior. We can deal with maturity, but he's still a man. And so, that's my real thoughts, is maturity is not an identifier.
That's good. I mean, what just keeps coming to mind is how Jesus talked many times about, and there's several different scriptures where and it relates to many different things, but he talks about mentioning my name before the congregation, and I'll mention your name before the Father. And it reminds me of what you're saying and what the Father did for Jesus when he was baptized, is he spoke it audibly. It was important not just to speak it to Jesus's heart, but to speak it before the crowd of people, that this is my son.
Yeah.
And so that brings me, we don't need to go through the whole ceremony that you put on. Everyone's would look a little different, but name some of the highlights. And I don't even know, because I've never been to your sons or daughters' ones, but I've seen a few highlights. And I know there's some things that your sons would speak. And then there's some things that some other men would speak. And then there's some things that you would speak. So just hit a couple of those highlights of what you kind of.
Well, so
I've seen one of yours, but all of them looked a little different.
Yeah. So so all of our ceremonies for both our sons and daughters had the same kind of parts to it. and that's just the way we chose it. But that time, we had these 4 commitments that both the young adult or the child becoming a young adult and dads make it. I had to make the same commitments because obviously I couldn't ask them to vow something that I wasn't willing to. But so that ceremony starts out with them publicly committing to these 4 things, and they have to do with what it means to be our definition of manhood, to try to live it best we can, knowing we're going to fail. Commitment to the relationship with parents and siblings. We believe that's the right thing to do. And we even, there's a commitment made into how we're going to give our heart to a wife someday, how we're going to pursue that wife, what we're not going to do, and what we are going to do. And what does that a commitment to that process, believing the Lord does want them to be married, and how he would have that come about in their life. So that's another commitment. And then I'm trying to think the 4th one. They're all so closely related, but just the commitment to relationships with authority in the future, our bosses, our pastor, or whoever it may be, our father-in-law, So we talk about those relationships, and we decided what we believe to be a biblical way to handle those. And then we've made these commitments. So the ceremony starts out. Actually, you know how the ceremony starts out? Is my wife and I bring the child up front, and we've had as many as maybe 150 or maybe even more people at one of these ceremonies. And we try to embarrass them in every way we can by telling stories about them. So y'all ain't gonna believe what this joker did when he was a child. You know what I mean? And so we just tell funny stories. And at the end of that, so he's not done one thing publicly. I take and I look to everybody in the crowd and I say, I want everybody here to know this is my son. And I am as pleased with him right now as I'll ever be in his whole life. He's not fixing to go through this ceremony and now I'm pleased. I am pleased. He's my son. And so I do that. And most often I am weeping and he is weeping and mama's weeping and 150 other people are weeping because of the power of that declaration of acceptance and love in a public way. So then the ceremony starts and they go and they make public those 4 commitments. Then we have 5 gates of character qualities that they walk through. And at those gates, they have to recite Bible verses concerning character qualities that we've made a vow to live by. And that's one of those vows, those 4, is that I'll live by this definition and these character qualities. And at each gate, we have another man that my son admires step in after they quote those Bible verses and just release and pray for the Lord to mark them with these qualities, to give them a passion to live them and bless them. So then the last gate, the 6th gate of our ceremony, is the gate of manhood. So, and they have to kind of tear open something and walk through. So it's this choice. I'm gonna do what it takes to walk through these qualities, the gate of these qualities, excellence and integrity and servant leadership and honesty and purity and excellence. Anyway, that last one's the gate of manhood. So if he's ready, he tears that gate open. He walks through. He recites our manhood definition, and then I pray. Well, actually, I don't pray over him yet. I have him kneel down. We shout and scream because he's now an adult. I have him kneel down, and I've got this one dagger that I bought for all 7 of my children. I even bought me one. And I take that dagger, and I was moved by a movie I watched once about what a king said to a young man becoming a knight. So I rewrote it for Jesus. And I recite that over my son, and I rewrote it for girls, and I recite that over my daughters. And again, literally raise them up as an adult, as a man. Mm-hmm. At that time, all the men gather around him one more time, and I pray a prayer of blessing over him. And I begin at that moment relating to them as an adult. Now, again, when I go to work today, if I have a job, there's going to be adults there, and some are going to be real immature and some are going to be real mature, but I give a certain respect because they're adults. Mm-hmm. And I do the same for my kids. And they still got a whole lot to learn. A 13-year-old, oh, my soul, just getting started learning. But I relate on the basis of adulthood, not you're a child that needs to know and do everything I say. Yeah. And it's been real powerful. I could tell you story after story after story of just significant things.
Just hearing, and I've watched highlights and clips of a few of your children's ceremonies, but just hearing it and being through a graduation myself, that would be way more powerful than my high school graduation. Just because of how much it speaks to everything we're created to be. Yeah. And totally. The relationship to Father. And if you have brothers, the relationship, because I've seen where your sons come around and just celebrate the other, and what that calls them up to. I mean, just mind blown. So that's powerful. And another line that Joy said, just in hers, it's always stuck, and I've mentioned this before, just thank you for taking the job of being my father seriously. And that's what that is. I mean, creating, I'm going to make much of this. Yeah. It's huge for your children. Yeah. In just every little aspect, but definitely that one.
Yes, I agree.
So
I agree. I'll say this as a little tidbit of advice to every father out there. Every chance that you get to publicly bless your children and tell the world that you're pleased with them, do it. Mm-hmm. It's interesting. I'll tell this story. So one of my sons went to do an internship at a Christian ministry over in another nation. And this was, I'm not bragging, this blessed me that in all my whatevers, my son got kind of honored, and it ended up kind of speaking highly of me. But he was taking this class, and it was just on, I think it was on father's blessings or something. So the teacher gets up and he's like, well, I always start this class out by asking this question, and I've never had a kid answer it. And he said, has anybody here ever actually has your father ever actually spoken a blessing over you, like once in your life? And of course, nobody in my son's class, and my son raised his hand. And the guy was shocked. He said, how did it happen? He's like, I've never had a kid. Now, it's terrible that he's never had a kid answer yes. And so he's just blown away. He's like, so your dad has spoken a blessing over you? And he was like, yeah. And he says, like, what, once? And my son goes on to say, probably once a week, maybe once a month. And this guy, I mean, it's just, Jeremiah says, Jeremiah's the son that his jaw is just dropped. And he's just like, well, that's what the class is about. He's
kind of ruined my icebreaker, but
well, no, he's just like, we have this class because we've never had a father's blessing. So we're here to give you a father's blessing, and you've already had more than I could give. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. And so that's my advice to fathers. I mean, you're in the grocery store. There's people waiting on you to hurry up and get through the line. Just take the opportunity to tell the cashier, you know what? This son right here, he's awesome. I bless this son of mine. Just while you're swiping the card, just let your kid and let others hear you do it. You're wherever you are, just let your kids, and my kids, I had no idea. They're 30 years old, the oldest one. And when we all get together and I can, like today, we'll be sharing and just say, well, I'll go around the room and just speak a blessing over each one. And they just start weeping as 27-year-old young men. And they'll just say, Dad, that's my greatest accomplishment on the earth, is to get your voice and your blessing. Please don't ever stop. So, I mean, as 30-year-olds, they need it. As 20-year-olds, they need it. And so as 7-year-olds, they need it. So just a little quick piece of advice: bless your children. Go in there at night. When you pray with them at night, speak a blessing. If you don't know what to say I bless them. Mm-hmm. And the Lord will give you more to say. Just think about what you want them to become. And bless, Lord, I say this young man is going to seek God with all his heart. He's going to say no to sin. I bless him that he will say no to sin. I bless him today that he'll hear the voice of God. And so you can go on and on. But that's what a rite of passage ceremony is. It's a public blessing, a public transition of a season of life. Mm-hmm. Graduation's one. So guess what I say at their graduations? I get up in front of everybody. And you may think that I'm just, it's this robotic thing. No, I am so pleased. And when I think of it, I just start weeping to be able to stand up in front of people and say, I am pleased with who you are as a young man, so at their graduation, we've done homeschool type graduation. So ours are a little different than just, 300 people walking through a line. So I get to speak at mine, and I always, let me just tell y'all, even if we hadn't graduated today, I'm pleased with this one. You know what? The graduation's icing on the cake, but I'm pleased because of who they are. Their last name is Aldy. And so anyway.
It's powerful. And it's really lacking, I think, in a lot of our homes and it's something that as fathers, I think we need tools, and we need to know. I mean, you can hear so many times someone say, be a good father or be there for your children, just kind of these vague terms of signing up to be a good dad. But some guys just like, I don't know what that means. I mean, I didn't know family night. Okay. Well, I can do that, well, what do I do for family night? Well, here's A, B, or C, and then, this is another one that's when your kids, I just have this thought of, a lot of us, the Bible talks about our children being arrows in the quiver, but a lot of times I just think we stop there instead of thinking, or I guess we just envision just shooting this off into the woods and just hoping
it
hits something, and I've said this before, but you just aim for nothing, you're going to hit it every single time.
Yep. Totally.
But this is really aiming. This is the mark that you're aiming for your sons.
Yeah.
Is let's aim for 13. Let's line it up with God's timetable of maturing into a man. And because there's symptoms everywhere, and we could go into an hour discussion about symptoms that we're seeing all over the earth today of men not knowing who they are and not acting who they are, and it's destroying our society.
It is.
And so this is the mark I think we need to aim for, is at this age and what we do as fathers for our sons at this age. So awesome. I think we've gone long enough on it. Once again, any comments or discussions or topics you want to hear, please email us at info@turninghearts.com and address it to Dennis. Let him know what you think and what you'd like to hear or how these topics have touched you. We want to hear that stuff. So
amen.
Bless you all. And Dennis, anything you have left to say?
No, just encouraged to you have what it takes. You have what it takes. Even if you didn't feel like you got that from your father, you can be that to your sons and daughters. And And so believe in yourself. The Lord definitely does. And so what a blessing to just get to share and talk. And we appreciate people listening. It's an honor to us because everything that we have, we got it from the Lord or from other men in our lives. And so there's nothing to claim here. So thanks that you would listen. I appreciate it.
All right. Bless you all. Have a good one.
Amen.
Thanks for listening to the Turning Hearts podcast.